After my wife's family humiliated me at the reunion, she told me to apologize or leave. So I bought a one-way ticket. By the time they noticed, it was too late. The night I bought a one-way plane ticket out of Alabama, I was sitting in a Waffle House parking lot in my truck with a half-eaten waffle on the passenger seat and 43 unread text messages from my wife's family lighting up my phone. Not one of them asked if I was okay. Every single message was just a different version of the same demand. You need to come back and apologize. My sister-in-law Candace sent 5 messages in a row, each one a little more threatening than the one before it. My brother-in-law Derek sent a voice memo that I did not open. And Raina, my wife of 9 years, the woman who had stood across from me on our wedding day and promised me it would always be us against the world, sent exactly 2 words. Apologize. Now. Not, are you safe? Not, where are you? Not, I love you. Just those 2 words, like an order, like I was a dog that had chewed up a couch cushion and needed to be corrected before the adults could move on with their evening. I set my phone face down on the seat. I picked up the waffle and I thought about something my grandfather used to say when I was growing up in Opelika. He used to say, "Stewart, the moment you apologize for being yourself is the moment you start disappearing." When I was 9 years old, I did not fully understand what he meant. Sitting in that parking lot with my marriage cracking open in real time, I understood it completely. I opened the Delta app on my phone. I typed in Birmingham to Denver. Then I booked the first available flight for 6 o'clock the next morning, one way. That was the beginning of the end of the life I had been quietly tolerating for 3 years. And it was the beginning of the life I actually deserved. My name is Stewart Mallory. I am 44 years old and I run an online accounting firm from my home in Harpersville, Alabama, a small town about 45 minutes southeast of Birmingham. Harpersville is the kind of place where people still wave from their front porches and where everyone knows which truck belongs to which family. It is quiet, familiar, and the sort of place where a man can build a life without ever making much noise about it. My firm handles tax planning, bookkeeping, and financial consulting for small business owners across 12 states. I have 22 clients who pay monthly retainers, a few dozen more who come to me seasonally, and in a good year, I clear well into 6 figures doing work I genuinely love. I do that work from a home office that overlooks about 3 acres of pine trees. Raina and I planted those pine trees during our first year of marriage. From the outside, my life probably looked ordinary. I was a quiet guy in a small Alabama town, working from home, driving a truck that was 2 years old but not flashy, wearing Carhartt shirts to the grocery store. That was the version of me Raina's family had decided was the truth. They decided it years ago, and no amount of evidence to the contrary ever seemed to change their minds. Raina grew up in Huntsville. Her family, the Pressfields, were loud, opinionated, close-knit in a way that did not always mean healthy, and absolutely convinced that they were the final authority on anything that mattered. Her mother, Donna, was a retired school principal who treated every conversation like a parent-teacher conference, where she had already decided the outcome. Her father, Gene, was a commercial contractor who had built exactly 2 things in his life: a decent business and a deep, unshakable belief that any man who worked indoors was not really working at all. Raina had 2 brothers. The first was Derek, whom I have already mentioned. The second was Cooper, her younger brother, who was 31 years old and had never held a job for more than 8 months, but somehow had an endless supply of opinions about financial responsibility. And then there was Candace, Derek's wife. Candace had appointed herself the social director of the entire Pressfield operation. She treated family gatherings like military operations she was commanding from a clipboard. Before I tell you what happened at the reunion, I need you to understand something about my relationship with these people. In 9 years, I had never once been welcomed into that family in any real sense. I was tolerated. I was present. I showed up, I sat down, I ate the food, I smiled at the right moments. I answered the same questions year after year, and I let the same comments slide, because I kept telling myself that peace was worth more than being understood. But there was always something just beneath the surface of every interaction. There was always a slight edge in Gene's voice when he asked about my work. There was always a pause from Donna that lasted half a second too long before she answered a question I asked, as if she was calculating whether my question was worth engaging with. And there was always the joke. I call it a joke because they called it a joke. The joke was that Stewart did not really work. "Oh, Stewart works from home," Donna would say. She would say it in that tone that meant the opposite of the words themselves. Jean would nod and say something like, "Must be nice." Derek would laugh in the way men laugh when they want to pile on without technically saying anything they can be held accountable for. And Raina would smile. Then she would change the subject. For years, I let it go. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself they simply did not understand what I did, and that was fine. I made good money. My clients trusted me. My business had grown every year for 6 straight years. I did not need the press fields to validate me. But there is a long distance between needing validation and deserving basic respect. I had spent 9 years confusing the two. The annual Pressfield family reunion happened every summer, rotating between different family members' properties. That particular year, it was held at Jean and Donna's lake house on Logan Martin Lake, about an hour from Harpersville. It was a Saturday in July, which meant it was already 92 degrees by noon. Everyone was either in the water, stationed near the coolers, or in Jean's case, holding court on the back deck, like a man auditioning to become his own memorial. Raina and I drove up together. She was excited in the way she always became around her family. Looser, louder, laughing at things she would not have laughed at on an ordinary day. I always noticed that about her. When we pulled into her parents' driveway, she became someone slightly different. I used to find it endearing. By that point, I mostly found it exhausting. The first hour was fine. I helped carry food from the vehicles. I said hello to relatives I had not seen since the previous summer. I answered the same questions about my work that I always answered, using the simple version, because the full version would have required a whiteboard and 45 minutes. Jean grilled. Donna organized. Candace circulated with a camera photographing everything. Cooper showed up an hour late and immediately began telling a story that required everyone's complete attention. And then Jean said it. We were gathered near the back deck, in that overlap of maybe 25 people between the yard and the water, when someone asked Jean about the expansion he was doing on his business. He had been talking for months about adding a residential division, and it was a significant financial undertaking. I had actually done some research on it in my free time because I had been quietly hoping to offer him some guidance. Not because I expected anything in return, not because I wanted credit, just because it was what I did. Jean was explaining some of the logistics, and I said calmly and conversationally that based on what he had described, there might be some tax structure implications worth considering before he signed any contracts with subcontractors. I told him the way he set up the division could expose him to a kind of liability he might not be accounting for. Jean looked at me the way you look at a child who has just offered advice about how to drive. "Stewart," he said. He said my name like it was a polite cough. "I've been running a contracting business for 30 years. I think I understand how a business works." I nodded. I said, "Of course. I just meant from a tax perspective." Jean said, "I've got a CPA for that." Derek was standing 3 feet away holding a beer. He said, "Yeah, last thing we need is advice from a guy who does everybody's taxes on his laptop." Then he laughed. Cooper laughed. 2 cousins I barely knew laughed. Donna smiled at something across the yard. Candace took a photo, and Raina said nothing. I want you to sit with that for a second. Raina said nothing. I did not explode. I did not make a scene. I did not insult anyone. I did not try to force Jean to listen to me. I simply said, "Fair enough." Then I picked up my drink, walked down to the edge of the water, and stood there for about 10 minutes looking at Logan Martin Lake. I thought about how much I had swallowed over the years. I thought about how many small moments, exactly like that one, I had absorbed, dismissed, and carried quietly home. And I thought I had done the right thing by walking away. I thought I had been the bigger person. But sometimes walking away from a small fire only gives it room to grow. It got worse about 2 hours later. Candace had organized a group activity, some kind of trivia game. She had printed out on matching sheets. I will give her credit for that. It was actually thoughtful. Families split into teams, and the questions ranged from pop culture to general knowledge to a Pressfield-specific round about family history. People were laughing and getting competitive in that harmless way people do at family gatherings. Then came the money round. One of the trivia questions was about investing. It asked what type of account offered the best long-term tax advantages for self-employed individuals. I knew the answer immediately. It was a SEP or a solo 401k, depending on contribution limits. I said so clearly. I said it correctly. Cooper said, "That doesn't sound right." I said patiently that I was actually a financial professional, and I was fairly confident. And Cooper said, exactly as I remember it, "Being self-employed doesn't make you a financial professional, Stewart. Anybody can say they own a business." The deck went quiet for just a moment. It was one of those moments where everyone suddenly becomes fascinated by their shoes, their drinks, or their phones because they know a line has been crossed, but nobody wants to be the one to say it. I looked at Raina. She was looking at the trivia sheet. I took a breath. Then I said, "Cooper, I have a CPA license and an enrolled agent designation. I have been managing multi-state tax strategy for business clients for 11 years. I think I know what a SEPIRA is." Cooper shrugged. "All right, man, don't get defensive." That word, defensive. It is one of the most effective words people use to shut down someone who is simply standing up for himself. The moment you are labeled defensive, anything you say in your own defense becomes evidence of the label. It is a trap, and Cooper knew exactly what he was doing. I stood up from the table. I did not yell. I did not throw anything. I did not call anyone a name. I simply said calmly that I was going to take a walk. Then I walked off the deck, went down to the far end of the dock, sat down, looked at the water, and thought very seriously about what kind of man I wanted to be for the rest of my life. Raina found me about 20 minutes later. I thought she was coming to say she had seen what happened. I genuinely believed she was coming to tell me she should have spoken up. I thought she would squeeze my hand and remind me that she was on my side. Instead, she sat down beside me and said, "You embarrassed me out there." I looked at her. "I embarrassed you?" She said, "You made a big deal out of a trivia game." I said, "Raina, your brother told me in front of 25 people that I don't count as a professional. Your father dismissed everything I said this afternoon. Derek has been making comments all day and you have not said one word." She said, "They're my family, Stewart." I said, "And I'm your husband." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said the sentence I will remember for the rest of my life. "You have two options. You can go back up there and apologize for making things awkward, or you can leave. But I am not going home over this." I stared at her. I looked at this woman I had been married to for 9 years. This woman I had built a life with, planted pine trees with, bought furniture with, and built a business beside. And I realized something I had been refusing to see for a long time. Raina had already made her choice. She had made it years ago, and it was not me. I said, "Okay." Then I stood up, walked to the parking area, got in my truck, and drove to the Waffle House in Cropwell, because I needed a place to sit that was not inside that situation. I sat in that parking lot for 2 hours. I ate the waffle. I watched the text messages come in. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about my clients, people who trusted me enough to hand me their financial lives. And I thought about the version of me who would walk back up that dock, sit down with those people, apologize for the sin of knowing what I was talking about, and spend the rest of the summer smiling like it never happened. I thought about what that man would look like in 10 years. I thought about what he would look like in 20. Then I opened the Delta app. Birmingham to Denver, one way, 6 o'clock the next morning. Gate B7, $312. I hit confirm before I could change my mind. Then I drove home. I packed one bag, not even a full bag, just what I needed for a week, because at that moment, a week was all I thought I would need to make my point. I texted my assistant and asked her to reschedule 2 morning calls. I set my laptop bag by the front door. I set my alarm for 4:15. Then I lay down on my side of the bed in a house that was quiet because my wife was not in it, and I slept better than I had in months. I did not tell Raina I was leaving. I did not call. I did not text. I did not leave a note. At 5 o'clock the next morning, I drove to Birmingham Shuttlesworth International Airport, parked my truck in long-term parking, went through security, bought a black coffee, and boarded a flight to Denver, Colorado. I had a college friend there named Tyler Braxton. Tyler and I had known each other since we were both 19-year-old accounting students at Auburn University. He had moved to Denver 12 years earlier, built a life there, and had been inviting me to visit for longer than I could remember. I texted him from the gate, "Might be coming your way. Can I crash for a bit?" His response came in 40 seconds. "The guest room has been ready since 2019. Get here." I landed at Denver International at 9:15 in the morning Mountain Time. By 10 o'clock, Tyler was picking me up at arrivals in a blue truck that was older than my guilt. By noon, we were sitting on his back deck in Jefferson County with coffee and a view of the foothills that looked like something a person would put on a wall to remind himself that the world is bigger than whatever problem he is carrying. Tyler did not ask a lot of questions. He let me sit. He made lunch. He talked about his own life, his daughter's soccer tournament that weekend, the project his company had been working on, and the elk he had spotted at the tree line 2 mornings earlier. He gave me space to be a human being without an agenda. It was the most normal I had felt in longer than I could specifically remember. Back in Alabama, the Pressfield family reunion continued without me for about 4 hours before anyone apparently started seriously wondering where I was. Raina called at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 3:30. Voicemail. At 4:15, she texted Stewart, "Where are you? Come back and let's talk." At 5:40, she texted, "Okay, I'm getting worried. Please answer." At 6:53, after she had presumably driven back to Harpersville and discovered my truck was not in the driveway, she sent Stewart, "Your truck is not here. Where are you? Please call me." I read all of those messages. I did not respond to any of them. At 7:20, she called Tyler. I do not know how she got his number. She probably found it in some old email chain. Tyler knocked on the guest room door where I was reading and said, "Your wife called my cell." I said, "What did you tell her?" He said, "I told her you were here, you were safe, and you needed some space." I nodded. He asked, "Do you want me to tell her anything else?" I thought about it, then I said, "No, that's enough for now." The messages that came after that were different. They were no longer just from Raina. Donna texted to tell me I was being childish. Jean sent a message that said, and I am not paraphrasing, "Real men don't run from their problems." Derek called twice, which somehow surprised me most of all, because Derek had never shown any particular interest in my location before that moment. Cooper sent a long message explaining that I was overreacting, that nobody had meant anything by what was said, and that the family was just like that. As if just like that was a complete explanation, as if just like that was not a confession. And then there was Candace. Candace sent me a voice message. I eventually listened to it. She said what I had done was incredibly selfish. She said Raina was crying. She said the whole family was worried. She said I needed to remember that marriage meant putting my ego aside sometimes for the people I loved. I listened to that voice message twice. Then I went out to Tyler's deck and watched the sun drop behind the mountains. And I thought about ego. I thought about whose ego had actually been the problem in that situation. I stayed in Denver for 11 days. During those 11 days, I worked my normal hours from Tyler's guest room because my clients did not stop needing things just because my marriage was falling apart. I took calls. I filed returns. I answered questions. I did the work Gene Pressfield had spent 9 years deciding was not real work, and I did it well. 2 of my clients sent me the kind of emails that remind a person why he does what he does. I also did something I had been putting off for a long time. I called a therapist. I want to say that clearly because I think there is still a version of this kind of story where a man drives away, stares at a mountain, and figures everything out through sheer stubbornness. That version of the story is not honest. What I carried out of that reunion was not just anger at Cooper or Gene or Derek or Candace. It was something older than that. It was the accumulated weight of years of swallowing things I should never have swallowed. It was the weight of telling myself that peace mattered more than being seen clearly. It was the weight of watching my wife choose her family's comfort over my dignity again and again, and calling it love because the alternative was too painful to name. The therapist's name was Dr. Alicia Fontaine. She was based in Denver and Tyler had recommended her, which tells you something about Tyler. Our first session lasted 60 minutes. I talked, she listened. At the end, she said something that stayed with me. When we accept disrespect repeatedly in order to maintain a relationship, we don't actually maintain the relationship. We just maintain the appearance of one. I went back to Tyler's guest room that night and sat with that for a long time. Raina flew to Denver on day 8. She did not ask if she could come. She texted me the flight information the night before and said she needed to see me. I did not tell her not to come. Tyler picked her up from the airport because I asked him to. Then the three of us sat in his kitchen for the first 20 minutes, making the kind of small talk nobody wants to make, but everyone makes because sitting directly in the truth is terrifying. Then Tyler said he had somewhere to be. He did not. But he left us alone. Raina looked tired, in the particular way people look tired when they have not been sleeping well and have not been willing to admit why. She had lost some of the looseness she always had around her family. There, in someone else's kitchen in Colorado, she was just herself. A woman sitting across from her husband who had packed a bag and bought a one-way ticket instead of apologizing. She said, "Why didn't you just apologize?" I said, "Raina, what was I supposed to be apologizing for?" She was quiet. I said, "I knew the correct answer to a trivia question. Your brother told me that did not make me a professional. Your father dismissed me at the grill in front of 25 people. And when I asked you to be on my side, you told me I had two options, apologize or leave. So I left." Then I asked her again, "What specifically should I have apologized for?" She said, "You could have just let it go." I said, "I have been letting it go for 9 years. Do you understand that? 9 years of letting it go. And every time I let it go, it told everyone in that family, and it told you that it was acceptable. Now it is so normal that you can't even see it anymore." She started to cry. Not the theatrical kind, the real kind, the quiet kind, the kind that does not want to be seen. She said, "I didn't know it was that bad." I said, "Raina, you were there for all of it." That sentence landed harder than I intended it to, but it was true. And I was done softening true things. We talked for 4 hours that day. We talked the next morning over coffee. We talked during a walk around Tyler's neighborhood through streets that had nothing to do with our life, which somehow made it easier to be honest. What came out of those conversations was not a miracle reconciliation. It was not a dramatic reversal where Raina suddenly saw everything clearly, promised to change everything, and all the hurt disappeared. Real life does not work that way. Any story that tells you it does is leaving something out. What came out was smaller than that, and more important, Raina said, "I think I have been choosing them instead of you for a long time, without letting myself know that was what I was doing." I said, "I know." She said, "I don't know how to fix it." I said, "I don't either. But I know apologizing to your family so they could feel comfortable again was not a step toward fixing it. It was a step away from fixing it, and I was not willing to take it." She said, "I know. That's why I'm here." Here is what happened afterward. I know this is the part people wonder about. I came home to Alabama 10 days after I left. Not because I had received an apology from the Pressfields. I had not. Jean sent me a text that was as close to an acknowledgement as I think Jean Pressfield is capable of producing. It said, "Hope you're doing all right. Things got heated. Shake and move on." I did not respond to that text. Donna called Raina, and apparently they had a longer conversation. Raina summarized it for me by saying, "She thinks you overreacted, but she's willing to move forward." I told Raina moving forward was fine, but I also told her I was no longer willing to attend events where I would be dismissed and condescended to with no consequence. Raina was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." That okay was the first real thing I had heard from her in a long time. Derek and Cooper did not contact me directly for a while. Cooper eventually sent a single text 3 weeks after the reunion. It said, "No hard feelings, man." I interpreted that as his version of an apology and responded with a simple, "Thanks." We have not spoken since. Candace, remarkably, was the person who surprised me. She called me 6 weeks after the reunion. When I answered, mostly out of shock, she said, I've been thinking about what I said to you in that voice message, and I want to tell you that I was out of line. I don't fully understand what happened between you and the family, but I reacted without knowing the full picture, and that wasn't fair. I told her I appreciated that, and I meant it. Candace is not my favorite person in the world, but she had the character to make that call, and I will not forget it. Raina and I are still married. I want to be honest about what that means, and I want to be honest about what it does not mean. We're in couples counseling every other Thursday with a woman named Dr. Patricia Voss in Birmingham. It is hard. It is slow. There are sessions where we leave feeling further apart than when we walked in, and there are sessions where something opens up between us that I had not expected. But what I know is this. The man who drove to that Waffle House parking lot in Cropwell, Alabama, and booked a one-way ticket to Denver instead of walking back up that dock and bending the knee, that is the man Raina is married to now. Not the man who swallowed things. Not the man who smiled through insults. Not the man who confused silence with strength. The real one. My grandfather was right. The moment you apologize for being yourself is the moment you start disappearing. I had been disappearing for 9 years. That night, I stopped. I still work from my home office in Harpersville. I still look out at those pine trees. My firm added 3 new clients in the 6 months after the reunion. I have also been contributing to a video series about small business tax strategy that has apparently been circulating in some accounting circles, which makes Gene Pressfield's comment about my laptop feel a little more distant every time I think about it. I do not need Gene to understand what I do. I do not need Derek's respect. I do not need Cooper's acknowledgement. I do not need Donna's approval. What I needed, what I had been quietly starving for, was for my wife to see me clearly and choose me anyway. Not because her family said it was okay, not because I performed the required apology and smoothed everything over. Not because I made myself smaller so everyone else could feel comfortable, but because I was worth choosing. We are not there yet, but we are closer than we have ever been. And it started the moment I stopped apologizing for existing and let people feel the weight of what they stood to lose. Some people only understand what they have when the truck is gone from the driveway, when the calls go to voicemail, when the one-way ticket has already been purchased and the gate is already boarding. I gave the Pressfields 9 years of swallowing things quietly. What I gave myself on that flight to Denver was the first honest moment I had experienced in a marriage I still was not sure I could save. And that felt like a start. Sometimes a start is everything. Looking back now, I know this story was never just about a trivia question. It was never just about a comment at a family reunion. It was about the moment a man realizes that peace bought with self-respect is not peace at all. It is slow erasure. For 9 years, I traded pieces of myself for a quiet room. I let my in-laws treat my career like a joke. I let them treat my presence like an inconvenience. I told myself it did not matter because I was successful, because I knew the truth, because my clients respected me, because my work spoke for itself. But work can speak for itself and still not protect your dignity at the dinner table. Success can pay the bills and still not repair the loneliness of sitting beside a spouse who will not defend you. When Raina told me to apologize or leave, she thought she was giving me an ultimatum. What she really gave me was clarity. She showed me where I had been standing in her priority list for years, and for the first time, I stopped arguing for a better place. I left. I did not leave because I wanted to punish her. I did not leave because I wanted to embarrass her family. I left because staying would have required me to betray myself one more time. That was the one thing I could no longer do. I did not just book a flight to Denver. I booked a flight back to my own life. I proved something to myself that night. If I was not willing to stand up for myself, nobody else was going to do it for me. And if someone only notices your value after you remove your presence, then maybe your absence was the first honest language they were ever forced to understand. My favorite line from my grandfather still lives with me. The moment you apologize for being yourself is the moment you start disappearing. I stopped disappearing that night. I left Alabama feeling like a man who had been pushed too far. I came back as a husband who still loved his wife. but no longer plan to survive that marriage by becoming less visible inside it. That is the only version of me who can stay, and honestly, that is the only version of me who should.